So I wouldn't be standing here today if I hadn't missed a bus 12 years ago. I had been working as a shepherd on the northern foothills of Mount Etna, and I needed to get from one town to another, and I didn't get up early enough, and I missed the bus. So I found myself standing there hitching a ride, and a Fiat 500 stopped to pick me up. How many of you have seen a Fiat 500 before? So that's a car about this big, and I'm 6'4" and 200 pounds, and I squeezed my way in there and started talking to the guy who was willing to give me a ride. He was also a shepherd and had been a shepherd his whole life, and he asked me what I was doing as an American herding sheep on the northern foothills of Mount Etna. So I told him, and I'll tell you, I had been studying philosophy and literature at Harvard University, writing about philosophical skepticism, like, does this podium exist? How do we know it exists? And I began finding examples in philosophy and literature of folks writing about physical work as a response to philosophical problems. And then I realized I had never really done any physical work. And so I came up with a plan to remedy the situation. And I brought it to my college advisor, who had never given me any real advice before. And I laid out my plan. I'm going to drop out of school for at least a year and work as an agricultural laborer in Sicily. And he gave me 8 words of advice that I'll always remember. He said, I strongly advise you not to do that. It was like his whole career as an advisor had been leading up to that moment. And so I did it. I did it anyways. And I was trying to explain this to the wonderful man who had picked me up and thought it would be mystifying to him, but he got it like that immediately. And he said, you know, you're only really alive when your hands are touching things, when your eyes are seeing things, and when your mind is thinking about things. It's like a holy trinity. And you seem to come from a place where much too much you think and you see, but you don't touch. And I come from a place where I believe much too much we touch and we see, but we don't think. And you've come here to touch the world. And he grabbed my hand and looked at it, which is very nerve-wracking in a Fiat 500 on the foothills of Mount Etna because there are these switchbacks. And when he looked at it for a long time and he said, you need to go out and touch the world. And he let my hand go, which was a relief. And his hand, I saw go back to the steering wheel. And it was the most beautiful, deeply ridged hand with calluses in it that had so much knowledge of the way he had touched the world and a knowledge of place embedded in it. And I aspired to hands like that. So I threw myself into work, and I developed calluses of my own. It led me at one point to being a farmer, and later on it led me to devoting my life to growing this movement to change the way food and farming works nationally, globally. And as I did that, I began to realize more and more that every problem I cared about, whether it's a problem of environmental degradation or a problem of social injustice, a problem of the global economy, or a problem of public education, has at its core issues linked to food and farming. And that if we're going to address those problems in ways that are meaningful, we have to transform the way we grow and share food together. So that led me to this movement. But something else led me too, which was that I grew up on the floor of my parents' kitchen. And that for me, that was my playpen. And every evening, we had dinner together. And that table was so important to me. And I saw at that table how I had first learned to share. It was around that table I first learned to think critically. It was around the table that I first learned, and I think this is the most important thing, to disagree with someone and to still love them. And I think that we've all felt how when we're at the table together, we see what we have in common before we see what we have in difference. And for me, I realized that the kind of relationships and connections we could build at the table maybe could build the kind of power that we need as a community to transform food and farming. So I gave myself over to this work. I got involved in the social movement to change food and farming. And the more and more I got involved in the social movement, the less and less I farmed, till soon my calluses receded to my thumbs from overusing my BlackBerry. And then the iPhone flat screen just caused them to disappear entirely. And now, if I bumped into my shepherd friend, I'd be embarrassed to show him my soft hands. But I'd be proud because I gave up a connection to a particular plot of land, but I gained a connection to people all over this country and really all over the world who are working and fighting together so that food can be good for us, good for the people who eat it, good for the people who grow it, and good for the planet. And with that community, a couple of weeks ago, I watched with great expectation as the president delivered his State of the Union address, because we had reason to believe that he was actually going to speak in a straightforward way about what his administration would do to fix our food system. And I was disappointed when he didn't, so I decided to ask him a question afterwards myself.
My name is Josh Viertel. I live in Brooklyn, New York. Right now we live in a country where it's cheaper to feed our kids Fruit Loops than it is to feed them fruit. I'd like to know, what are you going to do to reverse that?
I have the First Lady. She was able to negotiate something with Walmart where for the first time they're going to start putting labels on their products and also emphasize more healthy choices for their customers. When Walmart ends up saying we're going to buy healthier stuff, then suddenly all the producers say, you know what, we better start producing healthier stuff. The other thing that we're doing, for example, Josh there was just eating an apple. One of the things that we're trying to do is to encourage linkages between local supermarkets, local farmers, local producers. That's good for the farmer, it's good for retail stores in underserved communities, and ultimately it's good for the consumer.
So I was really glad to hear the president talk about the connection between local farmers and consumers. But I have to say, hearing him hand over responsibility for fixing problems in our food system to Walmart was a little bit like watching him hand over responsibility to fix problems in offshore drilling to BP, right? Our food system is falling apart. 1 in 3 kids are going to grow up and get diabetes. It's the first generation of kids to die at a younger age than their parents. We are shipping $25 billion a year in subsidies and farm insurance to support the crops that are worst for us. The largest food corporations have totally taken over the government agencies that are supposed to regulate them, and we're expecting Walmart to fix it. I felt that this was a real failure in leadership on the part of the president, and it led me to realize something. You know, this YouTube question only got selected because 1,300 people voted for it. When it comes to fixing problems in food and farming in this country, the 1,300 people who voted for the question are actually going to be a lot more important than the one person who answered it. And that puts the responsibility back on you and on me. But it also led me to realize something about the state of the food movement right now, which is that if we're going to deliver on that responsibility, we have to change ourselves and we have to change our movement. Now, historically, the food movement's rallying cry has been, vote with your fork. And we should. We should eat food that has a story behind it that reflects our values. But if the food movement is a democratic election, we have to look squarely at the fact that in many districts, for many voters, there's only one candidate. It's the incumbent. It's fast food, right? And so even where there's a slow food challenger, many people can only afford to vote for the incumbent. And a movement of enlightened eaters is fantastic. But it's not enough to change that landscape. And so we need to shift from a movement of enlightened eaters to a movement of people engaged in changing their community and a movement of people engaged as citizens. And we're starting to see that shift. Now, fortunately, I think we can make that shift because I believe, and I've seen, that slow food, it's a gateway drug. Slow food's a gateway drug to civic engagement, right? You start with the table and you move on to changing the way your community operates. Now, I see this everywhere I go. In Temecula, California, a young single working mom, Leah DiBernardo, decided she wanted to see gardens at her child's public school, and she started one. And then she inspired parents at 24 other schools in her small city to do the same. So now there are 24 gardens there. I was just in Denver, where a young parent, Andy Nowak, as a volunteer, has organized 500 other volunteers to put gardens in schools. Andy and his little army have built gardens in 50 of them, right? So they're transforming the way that these kids are growing up. When I walk around the farmer's market now, I don't feel like I'm just in the company of enlightened eaters. I feel like I'm in the company of Andys and Leahs waiting to happen. And if we have 500 Andys and 500 Leahs, we've got like a tea party for the food movement. And even if the president has no answer to this question, we do. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do it anyways. We're going to build a world where it's easier to feed our kids fruit than it is to feed them Fruit Loops. We're going to build a world where there are more gardens in public schools than McDonald's has franchises. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I believe it certainly won't happen unless we make this leap from enlightened eaters to engaged citizens. but I believe it's possible. And one of the signs that it's possible is that agribusiness and these food corporations are fighting us like they never have before. And it's really an incredible time because of that. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a food corporation, an enlightened eater is actually a fine thing because you can turn that to profit. But an engaged citizen is really dangerous, right? So they now are throwing money at starting fake citizens groups like the Citizens Against Food Tax, and my personal favorite, American Agri-Women. And the American Agri-Women and the Citizens Against Food Tax are lobbying on behalf of citizens, of us, pretending to be us, but really lobbying on behalf of Congress. So I've come to a place where I believe, like my shepherd friend told me, that I have to touch the world because I'm only fully alive if I'm touching and seeing and thinking that for a movement, a food movement, to be truly alive, we have to be actively engaged as citizens, as individuals, and as community members. And that's a radical shift. And now that shift is scaring agribusiness. So they're starting these shell organizations. Every time Michael Pollan speaks at a university, the Farm Bureau ships young people on buses with little cards to ask questions like, why do you hate the American family farmer? Right? It's a little scary, but it's also fantastic. I think it's fantastic, and here's why. Now, Gandhi said, when you're fighting for what's right, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. So they're fighting us now, and we all know what comes next, right? But it's not going to come unless we make that leap. When I think about transformation in the food system, it's a big deal, and a lot of folks are ready to say go slowly. They'll push gradualism and incrementalism, much more comfortable. I think we can't afford to do that. And I think about this line from Martin Luther King when I think about how daunting this is, that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And it reminds me of another encounter I had. I started by telling you about being stranded as a shepherd on a road on the foothills of Mount Etna. And I want to finish by telling you about being stranded as a vegetable grower in an airport in Turin. So in 2004, Slow Food International put on an event called Terra Madre. There were 6,000 farmers they gathered from 160 countries, all together in Turin. It was going to be like Woodstock meets the UN for agrarian people all over the country. If you ever want to gather 6,000 agrarian people from 160 countries, don't outsource the logistics to Italians, all right? It was a disaster. And there I was in the airport. There's a delegation from Burkina Faso, and they have started their trip with a 2-day walk to a bus station. Then they got on a bus and another bus and a plane. I'm there, I've been traveling for 24 hours, so I don't feel that bad after hearing from them. And I hear from the Italian coordinator, please go explain to the delegation from Burkina Faso, because one of them speaks English, that we have to wait for another half an hour for the delegation from Kyrgyzstan to arrive. I explain, and they're okay with it. But that half hour goes by, and I get the message, please explain, it's another half an hour. We just don't know where they are, but we can't leave without them. And I go back and I explain again, I'm really sorry, it's just another half an hour. They say, I don't know what's going on, but we have to wait. And they said, it's okay. Another half an hour goes by, and I think they're going to kill me. And so I walk up, and I say, I'm so sorry to tell you this again. And the leader of the delegation from Burkina Faso, he stopped me, and he said, please, don't apologize to me anymore. You have the watches. We have the time. Thank you.